In this episode, we're going to treat prompts the way defenders treat other valuable traces of activity, not as mere text, but as evidence that something is happening, and sometimes as the earliest warning that something is going wrong. When people first learn about generative AI, they often think of prompts as polite requests that produce helpful answers, like talking to a very patient assistant. In security, we train ourselves to look at what users ask systems to do, because intent and behavior show up there long before a breach announcement does. Prompts can reveal confusion, risky curiosity, malicious probing, or accidental leakage of sensitive data, and they can also reveal when the model is being pushed into unsafe territory. Thinking of prompts as telemetry means you treat them like logs that can be searched, correlated, and used to spot patterns over time. Once you make that mental shift, you start seeing how prompt monitoring becomes a practical threat hunting tool, not a philosophical debate about AI. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. To understand why prompts are such useful signals, it helps to remember what telemetry means in security. Telemetry is information that systems produce about activity, like login events, network connections, file access, and process starts, and defenders use it to detect and investigate suspicious behavior. The key idea is that telemetry is not just for after something bad happens. It is for noticing changes in behavior and anomalies while you still have time to respond. Prompts are a kind of telemetry because they capture what a person or another system is trying to get an AI component to do. In many modern setups, the prompt is the control surface, meaning it is the input that steers behavior in a powerful way. That makes prompt data valuable in the same way command line history or web requests are valuable. If you ignore prompts, you may miss the moment when an attacker starts probing the boundaries, and you may only discover the problem once the outputs have already caused damage. A beginner-friendly way to think about this is to imagine the prompt as the front desk request at a secure building. Most of the time, visitors ask normal questions and request normal access, and the requests look boring. But when a visitor starts asking for the server room, the camera control closet, or the master key cabinet, the questions themselves are a signal that you should pay attention. Prompts often show these signals in plain language because people phrase their intent directly, even when they are up to no good. An attacker might try to trick a system into revealing secrets, bypassing rules, or taking actions it should not take. A well-meaning user might paste confidential information into a prompt by mistake, thinking it is safe because it feels like a private conversation. Both situations matter, and prompt monitoring can help you catch them. The goal is not to assume every strange prompt is malicious, but to recognize that prompts provide early clues about risk and misuse. When you monitor prompts, you are looking for signals, and a signal is a piece of information that has meaning when you interpret it in context. One signal might be a request for sensitive data, like asking for credentials, private keys, or internal documents. Another might be a request for harmful instructions, like step-by-step guidance for wrongdoing. Another might be a request that tries to override guardrails, like demanding that the system ignore prior rules or reveal hidden instructions. Even a prompt that looks harmless on its own can become suspicious when repeated many times with small variations, because that can indicate probing. This is where patterns matter more than single events, because attackers rarely succeed on the first try. They iterate, refine, and test, and that iterative behavior shows up clearly in prompt streams. If you only look at prompts one by one, you miss the story that emerges when you view them as a sequence. Patterns can be as simple as repeated attempts to get the model to talk about restricted topics, or they can be more subtle, like steadily increasing specificity about an organization's internal environment. A beginner might wonder how defenders can possibly track such messy text data, but the trick is that you do not need to understand every word perfectly to spot change. You can track categories of intent, frequency of certain risk indicators, and the relationship between prompts and outcomes. For instance, if a user suddenly begins asking for internal network diagrams, configuration details, and lists of privileged accounts, those requests form a pattern that deserves attention even if each request is framed politely. You can also look for prompt features that are common in manipulation attempts, like long blocks of instructions aimed at controlling the model, or text that looks like it was copied from elsewhere into the prompt. Even the length and structure of prompts can be a signal, because many injection-style attacks rely on placing large amounts of text to overwhelm or redirect the system. Threat hunting hooks are the practical handles that let defenders turn raw telemetry into investigations. A hook is something you can search for, alert on, or correlate with other data sources. With prompts, hooks might include certain keywords and phrases that often appear in attempts to bypass restrictions, or repeated mentions of sensitive asset types, like keys, credentials, or access tokens. Hooks might also include indicators of automation, such as very high prompt volume, extremely regular timing, or prompts that follow a template with small changes. Another useful hook is role confusion, where the prompt tries to convince the model it is acting as an administrator, a developer, or a different identity with higher privilege. Yet another hook is data exfiltration behavior, where prompts request summaries of large amounts of text that look like proprietary data, or where the user repeatedly asks the model to restate or transform data in ways that could help copy it out. Hooks are not proof of an attack, but they are reliable reasons to look closer, the way unusual login locations are a reason to investigate, not automatic proof of compromise. For beginners, it is important to understand the difference between monitoring for safety and monitoring for privacy, because they can sound like opposites if you phrase them poorly. Monitoring prompts as telemetry means you are watching for risk, but you should still protect users and data while you do it. That means you collect what you need, avoid collecting what you do not need, and treat prompt data itself as sensitive. A prompt can contain personal information, confidential business details, or regulated data, and if you store it carelessly, you create a new problem. So monitoring must be paired with thoughtful handling, such as minimizing the stored content, restricting who can access it, and keeping it for only as long as necessary. You can also monitor at different levels of detail, where some systems store a risk score or category rather than the full text for routine cases, and keep the full text only for investigations with proper controls. The idea is to gain defensive visibility without turning prompt logging into a data leak waiting to happen. Another critical concept is baselining, which means learning what normal looks like so you can detect what is abnormal. Normal varies by environment, audience, and use case, so a beginner should not think there is one universal definition. A customer support AI assistant will see lots of prompts with account questions and billing terms, while an internal coding assistant will see prompts about libraries, errors, and design ideas. Baselines are built by observing patterns over time. Typical prompt lengths, typical rate per user, common categories of intent, and normal times of day for activity. Once you have a baseline, you can detect shifts, like a user account suddenly issuing thousands of prompts, or prompts suddenly containing large pasted documents. You can also detect new types of prompts that were rare before, such as repeated attempts to access restricted information. Baseline thinking keeps you from overreacting to normal behavior and helps you focus on what is truly different. Correlation is where prompt telemetry becomes especially powerful, because prompts do not exist in isolation. If you see suspicious prompts and, at the same time, you see unusual access to internal data stores, unusual network connections, or changes to access policies, the combined story becomes much stronger. Even without getting implementation heavy, the high-level idea is simple. Join the dots between what someone asked for and what else happened around the same time. If prompts show repeated attempts to get secrets, and then you see an unusual data export event, that is a valuable connection. If prompts show an account requesting high-risk actions, and then you see that account's authentication pattern change, that matters too. Prompt telemetry is often the human intent side of the story, while system logs are the effect side of the story. Threat hunting gets easier when you can see both intent and effect together. A useful beginner lens is to separate prompt risk into a few broad buckets based on what you are trying to prevent. One bucket is data leakage, where sensitive data is placed into prompts or extracted through prompts. Another bucket is control manipulation, where the user tries to change the system's behavior by overriding or injecting instructions. Another bucket is abuse of capability, where prompts attempt to get the model to provide guidance for wrongdoing or to produce content that violates policy. Another bucket is operational misuse, where prompts cause unnecessary costs, degrade service, or generate confusing outputs that lead humans to make bad decisions. These buckets are not a perfect taxonomy, but they help you think clearly about why a given prompt pattern matters. They also help you design hooks that are aligned with real risks rather than random keyword lists. When you can say which risk bucket you are worried about, you can decide what signals matter most and what response makes sense. It is also important to understand that prompt monitoring is not only about catching attackers, it is also about catching design problems. If you see many users asking the same confused question or repeatedly trying to do something the system cannot do safely, that is a signal that your user experience and guardrails might be unclear. When people do not understand boundaries, they push them, sometimes accidentally, and prompt patterns can reveal where the boundaries need to be communicated better. If users frequently paste sensitive data because they think the assistant needs it to help, that tells you the system should provide clearer guidance and safer defaults. If users repeatedly ask for outputs that the system refuses, that could indicate legitimate needs that should be met through a safer workflow. Monitoring prompts as telemetry can improve security, but it can also improve usability and reduce frustration. A mature program treats it as feedback that drives better design, not just as a way to punish users. Because prompts are messy human language, defenders should be careful about assuming that every suspicious-looking phrase means the same thing. Context matters, and so does the difference between curiosity and intent to harm. A student learning security might ask about exploitation concepts for educational reasons, while an attacker might ask the same words with a different goal. Prompt monitoring is strongest when it looks for behavior patterns, not just single phrases. It is also strongest when it is combined with response data, like whether the model refused, complied, or produced a risky answer. If you see repeated attempts followed by partial compliance, that is a different situation than repeated attempts met with consistent refusals. This is why prompt telemetry works well for threat hunting, which is an investigative mindset that expects ambiguity and seeks additional evidence. The goal is to develop a habit of collecting signals, forming hypotheses, and testing them using multiple sources of information. When you think about operational response, you want prompt monitoring to lead to sensible actions that reduce harm without creating chaos. Sometimes the right response is simply to flag an account for review because the pattern is unusual. Sometimes the right response is to tighten guardrails or improve detection rules because a new manipulation tactic is appearing frequently. Sometimes the right response is to temporarily limit high-risk capabilities for a specific user segment until you understand what is happening. In more serious cases, prompt telemetry can help you contain an incident by identifying which conversations may have included sensitive data and which users may have been exposed. The key idea for beginners is that telemetry is only useful if it connects to decisions, and decisions should be proportional to evidence. Overreacting to every odd prompt will create noise and distrust, while ignoring patterns will allow slow-moving abuse to grow. Monitoring is about finding the balance that lets you respond early and calmly. To wrap up, prompts are not just inputs. They are one of the richest streams of intent data you can observe in an AI-enabled system. When you monitor prompts as telemetry, you look for signals that indicate data leakage risk, manipulation attempts, abusive intent, or operational misuse, and you pay special attention to patterns over time rather than isolated events. Threat hunting hooks give you practical ways to search and investigate, such as repeated boundary testing, unusual prompt volume, templated probing, and requests for sensitive assets. Baselines and correlation help you separate normal behavior from meaningful anomalies and connect intent with system effects. At the same time, prompt monitoring must be done safely, because prompt data can be sensitive and should be protected like other security logs. If you hold on to this mindset, prompts become a defensive advantage, a window into what people are trying to do, and a chance to catch problems while they are still small enough to fix.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.